Hello, world. Welcome to the Speed Strength Show. I'm Braden.
I'm Tommy. And if you take off from behind the 3-point line and dunk it, is that a 3-point dunk?
Uh,
Is there such
I
thing
do.
as a 3-point dunk?
I do think I know the rules on this. I don't. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true. I think as soon as you touch the like the rim or the backboard, then you've touched inside the 3-point line on the court. So you could get very close. I think if
So
you
it's
were
not
able
possible to
to.
3-point dunk. So if someone was
I
physically
think it,
capable of taking off from behind the arc and they dunked the ball, they wouldn't even get rewarded for 3 points.
I think if the ball goes through the hoop before your hand touches the rim, then it's a 3-point dunk.
Well, don't most of the times when they go to dunk, like if you watch it in slow motion, the ball comes out of their hands first, then they finish grabbing the hoop.
I don't know.
But there's
Honestly, I
never
don't
any
know. So
debate
actually,
because no one's taking off from behind the 3-point line. So
yeah, it needs to come off of your hand fully before you touch the rim. That's the rule, I think.
but I guess there's never
Because
been any debate because no one's taking off from the 3-point line. They're always
no,
somewhere
exactly.
within proximity of the basket, well within the 2-point scoring area.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. But I know if you like, you can shoot from behind the 3-point line, land in front of the 3.9, and you land presumably before the basket goes through the hoop, or sorry, before the ball goes through the basket. So I think it needs to be, if you jump from behind the 3-point line, release the ball however close you are to the basket, doesn't matter, but you need to release it fully before touching the rim, because then you've shot it from behind the 3-point line.
That that makes it less exciting. Like, think about if somebody took off from beyond the arc. Like,
I
think about how
know.
ridiculous that jump would be. And
Yeah,
that
dude.
person doesn't even get rewarded with 3 points.
Well, they could, though, is the thing. They
They
could. They just have
could,
to
but
do it very specifically. But I don't know. I think everyone would be it would be they'd be hard pressed, I think, to look at those minute details to figure out what it would be.
those officials would get booed out of the game if they only put 2 points on the board for that person.
You
Whether
think
it
so?
was the opposing or the home team, doesn't matter. I think everyone would get behind the individual that completed
Yeah,
the 3-point dunk.
you might be right. I mean, they definitely would go viral. Like, even if they don't get the third point, I don't know. I feel like having a worldwide, billion hit video of a 3-point dunk is worth maybe more than an extra point.
Depends on the game.
Well, that's a good point, actually.
Game
That's a
seven
very good
NBA,
point.
NBA Finals, you
Yeah,
you might need that point,
yeah, you do sometimes need that point. That's
but
true.
you would go viral for sure. MJ
Yes.
ended up on every basketball fan's wall in a poster taking off from the free throw line.
Yes.
So if you took
Yep.
off from the 3-point line, 100%, you replace that poster. That becomes irrelevant.
Yeah. Well,
Every
yeah.
kid rips that poster down off their wall and they go, sorry, MJ, wasn't good
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
And they'd
He can
slap
be
up the
on.
poster.
Yeah, he can be on other posters, but yeah, I guess not that one anymore. That's interesting. Do you think that's possible? Like, obviously, no
That's
one's done
naturally the
it. Like,
next
not
question.
now. Yeah, like not now, but like ever. Do you think?
How
Do you
far is the
think?
3-point line?
Oh, geez, I don't know.
I don't know either.
Like 24 feet, I think, something like that.
What's that in meters? I don't measure things in like America measurements.
Well, it's 3 feet to a yard, so
A
that's
yard
eight
still,
yard.
isn't that still an imperial measurement?
Yeah, it is, but well, that's why it works. So it's 3 feet to a yard, which is 8 yards, I guess. I don't know that 24 is right. I think it's close, but
I mean, when you're
it's
back there
somewhere
taking a
between.
shot, it seems like forever.
Yeah, I think it's 24 to 30, somewhere in there. So that's 8 to 10 yards.
It can't be 30. That would be way too far.
It's 8 to 10 yards. It's in that range, which I believe a yard is like 0.9 meters.
Yeah,
So
10 meters equals 11 yards. I'm pretty sure.
yeah, so it's like 7.1 or 2 to 9 meters in that range, something like that. You're comparing it to long jump.
Well, that was my thought
Yeah.
is like somebody gets a 30, because that's the world record long jump is the longest recorded jump that we know.
Yeah. Right.
And it would have the same constraints as in if you step over the line in long jump, they DQ the jump because you went over.
Mhm.
Well, if you stepped over the line and then took off for the 3-point dunk, if you step over the line, it's no longer a 3-point play.
Mhm.
So you would need to time it. So I'm trying to think, what's the longest jump? How far is the basket? Is it even physically possible to reach the distance from the 3-point line to the basket, let alone have the added vertical component to get up at least 10 feet in
Mhm.
the air?
Well, yeah, so there's the thing is like you don't need to jump obviously 10 feet high. You need to be able to reach like 10 and a
You
half
need to
feet
be able to
probably.
reach 10 feet or,
Yeah.
yeah, 10 and change because you need to get the ball over the hoop.
But see, there's a little bit of an advantage, I think, because in long jump, they measure from your heel, right? Like the furthest point back.
Yeah, basically the closest mark in the sand to the starting point is where they measure. So what they're doing in the air, like as they fly and flail their arms and things like that, it's to maximize what you do on the landing.
Yeah,
As where the
exactly.
advantage you'd have in this scenario is you don't really care about the landing, you just care about getting to the hoop.
Yeah, because it's arguably like you're not measuring the shortest point. You're measuring like the longest, highest point. So
Yeah.
you have the opportunity to like reach and lean and all
Can
that sort of
somewhere
stuff.
in that flight path get the ball above the hoop as you reach the hoop?
Well, it would need to be at the end. Like it doesn't. If you can get it, the the highest point would be in the middle, based on physics,
Yeah. But
right?
what I'm
You
saying
have
is
a
that
parabola.
somewhere in that, like whatever the distance is, even if you came
Mhm.
down from the peak, by the time you reach the
Yeah.
basket, you'd have to make sure that where you have the ball relative to that path, that flight path,
Hmm.
is higher than the basket when you reach that,
Hmm.
whatever what is it, the x-axis, if we're talking about
Yeah. Yeah.
grade 10
Yeah.
physics again, then when
Hmm.
you reach that point, however far it is to the basket, the ball needs to be above 10 feet.
Hmm. Hmm. And
I
we're
don't know if it's
theoretically
physically
dealing.
possible. I don't think it would be.
Yeah. I mean, I think a human could do it eventually, but it would take a very long time. Like, it's not like MJ's not the only person to do to the free throw line dunk. Like, it's been done a bunch of times now.
Yes.
You know, um, so it's I don't know. I think it could be possible eventually. The free throw line and the 3-point line are not actually that far apart. Like
Really?
it's like it's like 2 or 3 yards, I think. Which like is far, but it's also not that far.
Shooting a free throw seems way easier. Like I'm not a great shooter, period. Don't really play basketball. But the free throw line seems way less daunting than the 3-point
Well, it
line.
is.
If I have the
I
ball
mean, I
out in the
feel
3-point line, I'm like, man, this is in a different area code where I have to shoot the ball. There's no way this is going in. But at the free throw line, I do feel like I'm like, there's a chance I can make this.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think the difficulty, the further you get from the basket, I think the difficulty becomes like it's exponential. It's not linear, you know?
That's fair.
So I think that's part of it. And like for a novice basketball player, like the 3-point line is approaching like maximal distance that you can actually shoot a ball from with like, technique and not just throwing it like a baseball.
Just hucking it up there with a hope and a prayer, like, hope this goes in.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that plays into it as well.
But yeah, I don't even know if it would be possible
I
to.
do think basketball doesn't exist as a sport. by the time humans are capable of doing that.
Maybe with really good training, is it possible somebody could complete the 3-point dunk?
Were we just assuming that this was going to happen without training?
Well, I was trying to casually lead into the topic of team training by talking
Oh,
about the
very
training
good.
program with the basketball athlete,
Very good.
but
I didn't even you caught me off
now I
guard
kind of
trying
had
to
to
do the
spoil it.
transition. No, you caught me off guard trying to do the transition. Normally, I'm the one trying to stitch it together.
I just
But
honestly, that
good.
idea popped in my mind. I was like, I got to go with it. This might work.
Yeah, well, I think you nailed it. I think you did. I think you nailed it.
Obviously, we won't center the conversation of team training around making athletes capable of jumping from the free throw line to dunk a basketball. But
well, that would be arguably an individual pursuit because you'd be
correct.
choosing the best person who has the best, leverages and
Correct.
predisposal for the job. But you got to train everybody. You can't just train that one person. So
It's a team for a reason.
Yeah, that's right. It doesn't matter how many. Well, if you had a lot of 3-point dunkers on your team, then it maybe you wouldn't need more than that. But
that would change the game.
You needed having one 3-point dunker doesn't make the team. That's not enough.
That's a lot of safe 3-point plays, though. Score a lot of points.
I mean, you can get blocked if you're spending that much time in the air. Then it would not be hard to block you. I don't think.
Oh, what if there was an and one? You could have the rare 4-point dunk. You get fouled as you take off from behind the line.
Yeah.
3-point play from the dunk plus the foul shot.
Well,
it would change the game.
Now I'm kind of thinking,
but it's not possible.
Now I'm just also thinking before we get into the actual episode, there's goaltending. That's a thing.
Yes.
Which is if the ball's released from a shot and it's coming down and you block it as it's coming down, that's goaltending.
Goaltending, yeah.
Which doesn't exist on dunks because it's always coming down. So you block it like before it's released, essentially. So then I guess you could block this. Never mind. You could block this. That'd be fine.
Yeah, you'd have to have a pretty clear path then. Because you're right. You're in the air for so long, it'd be predictable where you're going. Because you can't change your path while you're flying through the air. So breakaway plays. Transition offense, 3-point dunk. Get back and play defense.
There you go.
Done. There we go.
That's right. That's right.
Train your team for that.
For the rare breakaway play. But yeah, train your team is the point of that conversation, I guess, of this conversation. Train your team. So I thought, like, we don't obviously know where this is going to go, but I thought we'd start by like talking about our experience. We've had some experiences together, obviously, and I think you've had more team training experiences than I've had. But yeah, I think it depends. Yeah, there's a lot more constraints when you're talking about training a team than versus an individual, obviously.
Yeah, there's a lot less freedom, in terms of the planning and what you're going to do. And like you talked a little bit about the experience we had working with teams together when we were at Waterloo. And I think the initial stages of what do you do with a team? How do you train them? How do you go about planning things? I don't think that has really changed much for me. I think there's constraints you're dealing with in terms of the schedule. So they obviously play or compete much more often than individual sports do. So you're working your training schedule around their games and competitions, and you don't really have a choice in that. The schedule is what it is. They travel when they have to travel. You have to work your sessions around that. So from a planning standpoint with a team, it's very different from an individual because it's a little less calculated in the sense that, we know we have this competition coming up. We are going to train and do certain things in a certain way prior to that competition. It's a little bit more chaotic with team environments because the schedule is different. And I don't think that will ever change. There's way more competitions in team sports than individual sports. So you're always going to be constrained to the team schedule effectively.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's actually not something that I thought about when we were prepping for this. There's a lot more competitions. Like competitions are more regular. The season is longer, I guess you could say, compared to individual sports. And yeah, so a lot of the in-season training is spent just like, what do we have time to do? You know, are we just this week like focusing on making sure everyone feels okay, making sure people are like maintaining as best they can, um, and like preventing injuries as best they can. Um, and you're gonna maybe have multiple peaks at like irregular times. Um, like if you've obviously we dealt with basketball mostly together anyway. So, looking at like this is a big game for this team. This is a big game for this team. Maybe it's like a divisional thing or a conference thing, or obviously you've got championships and things like that where you're a lot of big games back to back to back, and so you definitely have to be a lot more adaptable um, from that respect at least, and for other reasons as well.
Yeah, it's a much more flexible and adaptable schedule. As you talked about, it can't be so rigid where this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing. Because if you try to force it, it's probably not going to end super well, because ultimately the games and the schedule is going to defeat you at some point, whether that's overtraining with your athletes or injuries or whatever. But as far as the actual training goes, I don't think it's much different with individual sports. That I like to start at what I call like a level 0, or the fundamental movements, right? So I've shared a little bit on that, the pie chart, where you have a bunch of different basically base movement patterns or fundamental movement patterns, whether that's a 2-foot squat, a 2-foot hinge, uh, you know, vertical pressing, anything like that. And you want to establish competency in those movements and in those patterns, so that way you can branch out the training. And with team sport, I don't think it matters whether there's 50-year athletes on the team, first-year athletes on the team, if we're talking about, the varsity, or, if you're talking about age groups when they're younger, where they play within like a 2 to 3 year range. Doesn't matter if in the upper or lower end of that age bracket. If you've never worked with the team before, if you've never seen these athletes move, I like to start personally with what I call a level 0 program, where everyone's doing the same thing and I'm getting to see how they move. How do they adapt their movement when they're under fatigue? If we do more reps or they're tired, or things like that. Because ultimately, I'm trying to establish the foundations of solid movement patterns in the movements I've deemed important for that particular sport. But I'm always like I mentioned, to start on some sort of a level 0 to see how is everyone moving, where is everybody at, because then you can start to individualize or personalize programs based on their strengths, weaknesses, skill sets, anything like that. But like I said, personally, I think it's paramount to start at a level 0, so you know what you're getting into as a coach, and you're not taking anything for granted, like, oh, I'm assuming the older athletes or more experienced athletes on the team move better than the younger ones, or they're stronger, or they're this. You can't necessarily take that for granted if you've never seen them do anything.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think that's the case. Like you said, like it doesn't change too much individual versus team with like the philosophy, I guess, or how you start. You definitely, yeah, you can't assume that anybody knows anything. You've got to see that for yourself and then adjust at a later date. Um, the one thing I think makes it a little bit easier, like obviously I think the hardest thing is organizing. Um, the schedule is one thing. The weight room layout, like where everybody is, just purely available space and available equipment. Um, and how individualized programs are. Like organizing that stuff is the most challenging part about team training, I would say. Organizing your attention in a team training session is another one. But the one thing that I think makes it more manageable when compared to dealing with individuals is that if you had 30 individuals compared to 30 people on a team, I think the end goal for all of those team members is more or less the same. Where they are right now in that journey is going to be highly variable. So how you progress them is going to be variable to an extent, but you are trying to get them to more or less the same place. Again, depending on the sport, all these different things like football. I think the positions in football are highly variable when you compare it to hockey is not as variable, I would say, with the skills that they need to have. But compared to individuals, it's going to be entirely different. Like you have literally zero idea. They could be 30 different things that they're trying to train for.
Well, yeah, you're right. You could have 30 individuals and write 30 different programs. If you have 30 individuals on a team, you're probably not writing 30 different programs.
Right. Right. So I think that works in your favor. And then once you see how people are moving and see what they're capable of, then you can start getting a little bit more individual. But then the question is, how do you break it up? Like how individual are you capable of getting? It depends on your resources, obviously. If it's like only this team is your concern, or are you taking care of multiple teams, which is pretty common in a university strength coach setting. So you might not have the resources, you might not have like the available equipment, obviously, to be able to accommodate that, or the available time to be able to accommodate your lack of available equipment.
It's a downward
That's a
spiral.
complicated sentence. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, to your point, like, do you break it up based off of like the senior team members versus the younger team members versus rookies? Do you break it up by position? Do you break it up by like size or age, or training age? Or there's a lot of different ways you could do it.
Yeah, I mean that's obviously the like the next step, at least for me. So if we've spent some time, let's say let's call it 4 or 5 weeks, I'm working with this team. I now have an idea of maybe who's at a higher level, who's at a lower level, who's moving well, who's not moving quite as well. And then that's where you can start to maybe figure out pockets or groups of people that need to maybe be on a different program or focus on some different things potentially. And I think there's personally, like if it was just left up to me and it was Tommy, you get no input from anybody, you just have to decide how are you breaking these individuals up based on their groups and their abilities. I'm likely going to go one of two ways. I'm probably going to sort it by training age. If the sport is relatively similar, so you look at something like you mentioned, basketball, where everyone's got to play an offensive and defensive role to some extent. Hockey, outside of the goalie, who does things very differently, but you need to play offense and defense together. In a sport like that, I'm likely going to go the route of training age and kind of maybe split the group into 2 or 3 chunks based on how long they've been training and how competent they are. Because someone who's never lifted before, for example, is going to have to do things very differently than someone who's been lifting for 3 or 4 years or has been training for that long. You may have to do some different things to get the most out of those athletes and their training adaptations. The other end I might go with it is based on position. And that's in sports, like you mentioned, football is a prime example of the wide array of positions that are played, and individuals are specialized to play on one side of the ball, typically offense or defense. They might even have a specific role like the quarterback, the kicker, the punter, where they do some very unique things, and they're the only person on the field who does those sorts of actions. So in that type of a sense, it might be easier to break things down from a positional standpoint to best accommodate the athletes and their needs based on the sport that they're playing. So I think those are the two avenues I've typically gone, and I do like to go for those reasons as I've explained. If the sport is very similar, work by training age, because then you can maximize the adaptation. And if the sport is very different in terms of the team demands, then it makes sense to go by position, because then you can best prepare the athletes for the specific demands they're going to see on the field or the court or ice rink or whatever they play on.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that of course makes a lot of sense to, taking into account like how individual are the sport demands, and then making the decision based off that. I think regardless if it's a individualized sport or not, I think you need to have some level of training age accommodation. Obviously, like I think even if we're talking about a football team where everyone's requirements are relatively individual, um, I think it would make sense to have like you've got like a rookie program or like a low training age program that everybody, because it doesn't matter what position you are really. Like you talk about quarterbacks, kickers, punters, maybe it's a little bit more individual, but also what do we think the chances are that these people are going to be playing professional football, and making like a serious living? And then you weigh that versus, do we want to prepare them to be a quarterback or do we want to prepare them to be an athlete? Um, so I think even in that situation, like every incoming player is going to need to know how to squat. And so you've got your tried and true progression. You probably start with goblet squats and then you can go to front squats and then you can go to back squats or whatever your plan is. And then you would have a similar progression for all of the major movements that you mentioned. And once everyone's competent with major movements, then they can go into the positional program, you would say, that is going to be a lot more individualized. So I think, yeah, I think a combination of both is going to be the right call in a lot of situations. Because even like it's a lot less individualized, but even with basketball, we had a little bit of variation between like what were the guards doing, what were the bigs doing. And you would have a little bit of the same thing in hockey, like the forwards versus defense. And same kind of idea with like soccer and rugby. You've got a little bit of variability in positions there. So
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something you account for, and again, that's why, like over the years, I've really liked how that pie chart thing that I use has played out, because it does allow you to, on the fly, as you mentioned, maybe you provide a program for a specific position group in a sport, but then you can easily change. Oh, this is a first year kid who needs to get better at the movement, or maybe needs to develop some hypertrophy, something like that. They're going to do this variation of the exercise. Now I got a fourth or fifth year athlete on the team who needs to be a little bit quicker, or maybe needs to focus more on like velocity based stuff. Here's a variation of that movement they can do, but it's still the same foundational or root movement. So then it's not a super challenging task for you as the strength coach to make changes to the program to accommodate for that type of stuff, right? So you can easily write one program, as you mentioned, for the position group, and then make some modifications based on the training age. So yeah, it's great that you brought that up, because that is a good point. It's not going to be purely one or the other. There's always going to be a mix of a bit of both of them together. But like I said, personally, I find the training age and the positional demands to be kind of the two key elements you can figure out the training. And again, that would be from like an independent standpoint. I think arguably the best way to do it and go about that is to have discussions with the sport coach. How do they intend to play? How do they intend to use certain athletes within their strategies and their setups and things like that. If, depending on the sport, if they want a team that's going to be smaller, lighter, faster, and you're just grinding away with max strength and hypertrophy work in the weight room, then it doesn't matter how good a job that you do. You're not necessarily giving those athletes the skill sets that are going to be asked for them to use within their sporting context. So I think having conversations with the coach is the most important thing. And very rarely, I think, as a strength coach, would you have to independently make that decision and just go, what do I think is best for the athletes based on what I think the coach is going to do? You should probably have an idea or know what the coach is going to do. It's probably the best due diligence you can do as a strength coach working with the team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great point. That's a great point for sure. Because you can guess as a strength coach, because like the thing is, how they move in the weight room, right? You have an idea, I guess, of where you want them to be with their movement, but that's only a small piece of the puzzle, because like if they are, especially if we're talking about a university context, which I think for the most part we will be, because high school teams are not really doing strength and conditioning.
Should be, ideally.
But should be ideally, but yeah, money, right? They How they move in the weight room, it has some impact on the field, and I think the field has some impact on the weight room. But they are in this position because they're good at their sport. Like you don't get to the level of playing on a high university team without actually like being at least decent at the sport, So
You
even
have
if
to
they're
be.
trash in the weight room, yeah, if they're trash in the weight room, they're still good at football or basketball or volleyball or whatever. So you don't know, like your judgment of them in the weight room doesn't impact the judgment of them on the field that much. You don't know what they need to be doing better on the field unless you go watch them and know the sport really well, or talk to them or talk to the coach. And that was something that I really valued actually when I was at UW. There was one year that Corey had a meeting with, I think, every person on the team and was like, what are your goals for this off season? Which I imagine he talked to the coaches too, and talking to the coaches is probably better because you need to, how to, they know how they're going to use you, and you as a player don't really know necessarily what's going to make you better. Everyone just wants to bench 3 plates. So, but
Oh, football.
yeah. But no, that's a great point, because otherwise you don't know where they need to be going or what they need to be working on. You have an idea of what that position is asked to do, but as football fans, we know that 2 people that play the same position can be highly variable in terms of how they get the job done.
Yeah, and it goes like that in every sport. And I think that's why over the years, as I've worked with different coaches and in different sports, that's why I've kind of gone that route where, okay, if it's entirely up to me, how am I going to go about doing it? And if I can get some information out of the coach, how am I going to do it? Because sometimes you talk to a coach and, maybe you talk to a football coach and they're like, I want all the athletes on my team to be really strong. And you're like, okay, thanks. Like, I didn't know that. I didn't know that football players had to be strong. So it's a good thing you told me that, because now we're going to lift. Like, that's a pretty obvious thing. Or, you talk to a volleyball coach and they're like, yeah, I need these, athletes to be able to jump really high. It's like, oh, okay, perfect. Like, I wasn't able to think of that on my own. So it's a good thing you told me that. So sometimes you get a pretty generic answer of, oh, they need to be strong and fast and fit and explosive. So you're like, okay, I'm going to be on my own then to try to figure this out, which is then, you go down the, okay, training age position. Okay, what am I going to do? But ideally, if the coach gives you a more detailed answer, about how they're going to use their athletes and what style of play that they want to run, then it gives you way more insight in terms of how do I need to train kind of the overall team. I'm still making tweaks based on the person, their training age, position, and things like that. But if, for example, in football, if the coach tells you our offense runs a no huddle, up tempo offense, there's a premium on speed and fitness for those athletes. That's not a team that's going to run the ball every down and grind and wear you out. They're going to play fast, and they need to be fit. If, you know, in basketball, maybe a specific athlete, the coach goes, I use this individual a lot in defensive scenarios. So if we're up, I need that person to go in and play defense on their best player, or this person's a shooter, or this person's coming in and playing 15 minutes a game. This person's playing 40 minutes a game. Those are the types of things that really give you valuable information, I find, as a strength coach, to best accommodate for, that what everyone calls individualized programs. The cookie cutter program gets, shit on all the time and told that's not the way to do it. But it's very, very difficult to individualize programs for a big team. And that information from the coach can really help you make not necessarily massive tweaks to the program, but effective enough tweaks within your constraints to really help the athlete shine and be capable of doing what their coaches are asking them to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think you make a great point there that the coach, I mean, you might get generic answers, you might get more helpful answers. But yeah, like you're not looking for massive changes to the program. Like the base that you write, that like if you could only write one program and you gave that to everyone, like that would be mostly fine. Um, with minor changes for training age and things like that. But because as we've talked about on the show before, with regards to sport anyway, which this is for sport, it's not for sprinting, it's not for powerlifting, it's for something
Could be
else.
any team
The
sport.
training, exactly, and the training is a means to an end. So you don't need to be highly individual with the specific exercises you're selecting. Like you probably need something for hip extension. Whatever it is, doesn't matter too much as long as it does hip extension, and that's probably going to be fine. And then you might want to give them a little bit more, a little bit less of that, a little heavier, a little lighter, depending on, what position they play, what the team goals are. And things like that. So it is very minor changes, I think, as long as you've got a general program that fits the team goals, to your point about like the up tempo offense or whatever. And then minor tweaks to fit the individual's role in that team, I think is very helpful. I do think it can become problematic if it's helpful if the coach is telling you what the player needs to be able to do. It's not helpful if the coach is telling you how to get that player to where they need to be, because that's not their job. And I think not every coach, but I feel like there's maybe certain sports where it happens more often that the coach thinks they know what the right thing to do in the gym is. And I'm sure you've run into that many times.
I have, yeah.
So that can be a tricky situation to navigate as well. And the other thing I was going to mention is that I think some sports have like a culture or a perception around them. Like football's a big one for sure, where what you want to do as a strength coach might not match with what the players feel like they need to be doing or what they want to be doing. I know.
Do you know how quickly
that
I would get run out of town if I showed up with a football team and I'm like, look, we don't need to bench. It's not that important. I'd be fired on the spot just for saying
you would
that.
be fired. Yeah, you would. Absolutely. Well, and if we go back to exercise selection, maybe in football, there's specific testing that gets done, like at the combines, right? And as stupid as it is, bench press rep out is one of them. So football players need to bench. Unfortunately, that's the only reason they need to. Unfortunately, they need
I
to.
know, and it's such a stupid reason, and it doesn't even test
Yeah.
what people think. But that's a different.
No.
I'm going to go on a tangent. We'll
Yeah.
stay on topic here.
But the culture, I think, is another thing that you battle. The culture of the team, the culture of the sport. Because even if that wasn't a thing, football players are still going to want to bench. They're still going to want to lift heavy. They put a premium on like working as hard as possible, not doing the smartest thing in the weight room. And like the people I follow on Instagram that I know are university football players that I coached when they were playing junior ball. And I see them in the gym and I'm like, that's too much. That's too much for you. That's not the fastest way to make progress. So anyway.
Yeah, the culture piece that you bring up is huge because every sport, especially in the team sports, tends to bring like a typical culture that they have. I find the culture with individual sports is more, as the sport is, individualized, right? The culture is more the person. Each person is a little bit different and they approach things differently. But you're absolutely right. The team sports tend to have a general culture that's shared in and amongst those teams. Like you mentioned, football loves to lift. They put a premium on lifting heavy, and the numbers that they put out in the weight room, that's seen as a very, very important thing as a result of the culture that they have. Compare that to something like basketball, where it's difficult just to get basketball athletes in the weight room. They don't really care about lifting. So you almost have to approach that a little bit differently, where you're trying to get them to see, okay, this is where if you do some of this lifting stuff, it'll help you on the court. Where with football athletes, it's like, okay, if I pull back a little bit on you in the weight room, here's how it could help you on the football field, because they might go crazy. Or you think of a sport like rugby, where there's a premium on like how tough are you? Are you able to? What's your pain tolerance? So the idea of going into the weight room and having a high quality max strength session or power session might be sort of foreign to them, where it's like, no, I have to empty the tank on every single rep. I need to feel that pain. I need to push through that pain. I need to show how tough I really am. So it's great that you brought up the culture, because that's definitely something that is going to be unique to every team, every sport. And even typical, you may have a rugby team or a soccer team or something that doesn't fit the typical culture, but over time you're going to get to know the athletes. You get to read what are the coaches like, what are the sort of the team dynamics that are within that team, and then how do you program and provide them things for training that best aligns with that culture. And it might be giving them a little bit more than they need, because they don't like to do too much, or sometimes it's giving them less than what they need because they're going to overdo it, or there's a million scenarios you could think of. But yeah, the team culture is definitely something you can't ignore that as a coach.
No, 100%. You can't. Because yeah, that's a great point, that they are going to, you don't have 100% control. You don't have any control, honestly, over what they do. You have some authority, but you don't have control over what they're going to do. And I know, and like, I think I was smart about it. And I think that I checked in with our strength coach, but like, I did lift more than was programmed in my first year. That's for sure. And I mean, it helped. It was good for me. Um, but it might not have been good for everybody. But definitely taking that into account. It's kind of like when you go see your physio or your chiro and they say, do this exercise, you know, 10 reps, 3 sets, 5 times a day. And you're like, there's zero chance I'm going to be able to do that. But they really want you to do it once, 3 sets,
They've
10
overdone it.
reps once a day. Yeah. So because they know you're not going to follow it completely, they tell you to do more. So you think it's more important than it actually is. Um, I'm not saying everyone does that, but sometimes I think that sort of idea is necessary.
It's certainly a
But I
viable
also think,
strategy if you know the
yeah,
athletes and the scenario well enough. Like there's
well, yeah,
people you
you have
need to
to,
push, and there's people you need to hold back. So
yeah, that's right.
it's 100% a tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, that's right. But I do think, as I've mentioned before, there's a big time value on uh, like how much somebody's enjoying their training, um, and how much they feel that it's working and how much they feel that it's good for them, and things like that. So a big part of this actually is buy-in too, and how can you create buy-in? We talked about that with specificity, for sure. With um, some exercises look like the sport, so that can get people excited. Football players are going to want to lift heavy, so putting in more heavy lifts than they need is maybe something that helps. And if you specifically hold them back from that, they're going to be like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, you know. Um, and then obviously having reasons for everything you're doing, so that you can explain to a basketball player, this is how it's going to help your game. So if you go into it with this intent, you will see results on the court. Then they're like, okay, I can get behind that. It's not just do lunges. So
Yeah, I mean, the same way you can talk to the coaches, you can talk to the athletes.
mhm,
And I think that
mhm,
happens likely a little bit less in a formal setting. That probably happens more in and amongst the training session. We're like, hey, like, what are you enjoying about this? What are you not? Oh, like this exercise, I feel like it's making a difference for me to do whatever on the court or do whatever on the field. And then you put that in the back of your mind and you go, okay, they're feeling confident as a result of doing, this particular movement or this exercise. So maybe I find a way to progress or regress that movement and keep it in the program in a different form because they feel confident if that's in there, versus a scenario where, they might give you the opposite and, oh, this particular exercise or this, I don't know if it's helping me with that, or it's, this is bothering me or it hurts or whatever. And then you go, okay, let me toss this one out. Like you said, it's a means to an end. So it doesn't really matter specifically what we do to achieve, you know, hip extension or vertical pushing or whatever it happens to be. Put a different exercise in there that maybe is pain free or they find more enjoyable or they think is helping them transfer better. And then, okay, good enough. Like you've had some dialogue with them. They've given you some feedback and you've responded to the feedback in a positive way that's showing that they are influencing or shaping the training that they're doing, both as an individual and maybe as a team collectively.
mhm.
So it is important to talk to the athletes regardless of, how formal or informal you make that discussion with them.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point for sure. That, and even just as you were talking about that, I envisioned walking around pack is my default gym that I think about team training in.
Me too.
Um,
It still is for me.
with Yeah, you just, like, you've got athletes everywhere. You just got like your little notebook that you're walking around talking to people with. It's like, oh yeah, I really like this exercise. Great. This person likes this exercise. We'll make sure to keep it in for them specifically and just modify it to suit whatever the goals are for that time. Um, yeah, this person's having some, like, I was having back issues when I was playing football at a time. So then it's like, great. Okay, we're not going to deadlift. We're not going to squat at all. We'll just do RFS and hip thrusters. And even when it got really heavy, like there was times when we were doing like 8 sets of 2, 10 sets of 2. I did 10 sets of 2 with like 80-pound dumbbells in each hand or whatever for my RFS, and it was fun. It was nice. Just, yeah, that's what you need to be doing. Um,
Still met the goals of what you
I
had to
have
do.
also exactly. I needed knee extension. I got knee extension. That's all that mattered. Um, I have also seen strength coaches program things that are hard just purely because they're hard. To like go back to your point about rugby and like your toughness, and to develop a little bit of that mental strength and that ability to fight through. And I absolutely do not think everything should or can be to that intensity, but having elements of it in the program, I think there is value in that. And just like, how hard can you push yourself for X amount of time, or this is the weight that's on the bar, just go till you can't, kind of thing. And just see how far you, because I think there's a lot of self-efficacy in that as well. In It's like a true measurement of progress if you do that sort of thing repetitively. And it's also just going into it knowing that it's going to suck, but you do it anyway, and you do it better than you thought you could. There's a lot of accomplishment in that, which I think can help with buy-in, in the same way that individualizing based on your conversation with athletes um, can make them feel special or heard, or like you care about them, which obviously you do if you're taking the job. But if they feel it, then they believe in you a lot more.
Yeah. First, I don't want it to be misconstrued that I'm only talking to people about that stuff to make them feel as though there's like the
Absolutely.
feedback that the athletes provide you is incredibly useful. And I think if you are a good coach, whether you like your athletes or not, right? You don't have to be friends with them per se, but if you respect the athletes and you want to help them get better, you take their feedback, you work with them. So it's not just like a lip service thing where it's like, oh, I'm going to make that person feel good. I'm glad you feel good. Don't care what you actually think. That's not influencing anything moving forward. It's not like that at all. You're trying to get useful information from them to help guide the programming and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't want that to get misconstrued on air, and then I get called out for not being a pleasant person, whether or not that's true.
No, I think that's good.
But to your point,
it also kind of.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say it kind of reminds me of when Stu would talk about like when he would consult with companies, and all of the other like ergonomists or whatever would come in and talk to the management and like what do they have to do, and okay, cool, this thing will make that easier. But then you go talk to the people actually doing the job. How are they actually doing it? It's not at all what you think. And this is the same kind of situation where you can talk to the coaches, like this is what they need to be capable of. These are the team goals. How are the players actually doing it? What actually is going to work better for them? You got to have that conversation too.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. You're going to the people literally on the floor doing the job and asking them what's working and what's not. So that's why it's important that you communicate with the athletes. So I just wanted to make that clear in case it sounded like it was just a formality thing to make them feel good, like handing out participation medals or something like that. It's 100% a valuable thing. And then to your point about the mental toughness or are we getting better in that type of sense? We have something here that we kind of do at the U of A track team that's a little bit that idea in normal training years, obviously not this year because of the Rona, but we have this massive staircase by the river. It's a wooden staircase. It's probably like 200 to 250 steps from the bottom to the top in like different sections. And so we'll go there in the fall to do stair runs because stair runs can transfer to upright running really well. But at the end of the session, just to have some like team bonding or team building and toughness challenge, they carry somebody on the team from the bottom to the top of the stairs. Probably not super safe. Definitely doesn't benefit the athletes physiologically. Definitely doesn't benefit them biomechanically. Like it doesn't transfer well to the activities that they're going to do. But it builds some team culture. It builds some camaraderie amongst people on the team, a way to encourage, keep going, push through it. And you kind of use it as a checkpoint later on in the year when they're like, oh, this is going to be a tough workout. And you're like, well, at least you don't have to go climb the stairs with somebody on your back. And they're like, oh, yeah, you're right. That's way tougher than this. Okay, I can go out and crush this. So, like I said, hopefully none of them are listening, but physiologically, biomechanically, adaptation wise, 0 cents. It doesn't really need to be in there. But from a like you said, self-efficacy, I feel like I did something. It's definitely, a potential benefit to that side of it. So if you wanted a specific example of something that doesn't make sense to do from a training standpoint, but does from a team culture, then there it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's cool, and that's a good point too. That I think you obviously can have some of that sort of thing in, I don't know, like there's some of that team building stuff that you can do in practice, of course. Like we did, like there would be some kind of like one-on-one challenge or like offense versus defense challenge or whatever at the end of practice. That is kind of like a team building thing that's a little bit outside of what would be a normal practice. But you can do a lot of that same stuff, that team building, that just everybody is behind you, rooting for you, kind of thing in the weight room for sure, and have like challenges in the weight room like that, that I think is very valuable for sure, and not necessarily something that you think about as your job as a strength and conditioning coach, but I would say definitely has an impact on the team performance.
100%. I do not disagree.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think just before, I don't know if there was anything else that you wanted to mention, but just before we wrap it up, as one other idea I had about like splitting up the team in terms of like how individualized you get. Just as you were talking, I had the thought that you can, at least for me as a powerlifting coach, I see patterns of how people move. So if you like, typically squat and deadlift are both lower body movements. So their squat pattern and their deadlift pattern are going to be similar. So you would address them in a similar way. And the bench would have its own kind of pattern, and like those weaknesses are pretty consistent. So then if I had 30 powerlifters, 30 individual powerlifters, obviously all training towards the same general goal, then I could theoretically write like between 2 and 4 programs, and just, you are this type of person, you do this, you are this type of person, you do that. And you could probably get away with that kind of thing with a sport like basketball or soccer or hockey, if you had like whatever the equivalent of a pattern of person would be, and you could write 3 or 4 different programs and just pick and place kind of thing.
Yeah, that totally would be a viable strategy. I think for sure you could do that. Like you said, if you knew the sport well enough and you knew the patterns and the movements, and 100%, you could do it that way. Totally agree.
Mm-hmm. And then you would also have patterns of people that like to listen to certain kinds of music, I imagine, as well. Or
team sports
patterns,
and what to play in the weight room that's the biggest. We didn't even talk about that, but that's the biggest challenge. What do you play music wise to keep everybody happy? That's not an easy task.
Is that right? Is it the coach that decides?
I mean, it should be, but I often defer and let the athletes are the ones doing stuff. So I often defer to them, and
that's fair.
Let them choose.
But you're theoretically in the weight room longer because you theoretically have more than one lift, and they only got the one.
It's about the athletes, though.
That's right. It's always about the athletes.
That's right.
That's a strength coach who cares.
Now, let's pretend, hypothetically, you were a strength coach who didn't care. What are you tossing on this week? You just tell the athletes, I don't care. I'm in charge. This is what we're listening to. Don't make it K-pop again. The people are bored of K-pop. They've already explored it. They want something new.
Oh man. Like I knew I was yeah.
Yes.
I was gonna say you hate me, man. This is the deepest. I've never been in a hole this deep for this long before.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. I have honestly, not chosen to listen. Like other music has been on, obviously, but I've not chosen to listen to any other music in the last like month, basically. It's been rough. It's been fun. I've enjoyed it, but it's also, for this kind of a situation, it's not ideal. So,
As long as you promise next week to bring something new and exciting to the listeners.
okay, I will listen to something new. I'll make sure. At the very least, I'll bring a different group of K-pop. Maybe
That would work too.
maybe a more expansive list. At the very least,
I was going to say that would at least hit the
I'll do that.
minimum.
At the very least, I'll do that.
That'd be the minimum. Just getting over that. That would suffice.
Okay. You said you were listening to something. Well, you were gonna try K-pop, but then you didn't because you found something
Well,
interesting.
I had it on a list. Like after hearing about it for 19 weeks in a row on the show, I thought, okay, I should maybe go like look at a couple of songs and see what the deal is. It's also, again, when I logged into the YouTube account to upload some videos, all the recommended music or all the recommended videos is K-pop. So I was like, okay, I should maybe give it a listen. So I did have good intentions of doing that.
And I promise I haven't been listening to it on our YouTube channel. It's just Google knows. That's all.
It knows you. Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I had been meaning to like sample some of it and figure it out. But I got caught listening to a lot of the same song over and over and over again. And I know I don't normally, that's not really my style. But yeah, it was like one song.
Just one song? Wow.
Okay. So by now the listeners know I love synthwave. I think it's a cool genre. They know I love my heavy metal, right? If you don't listen to heavy metal, you don't lift heavy metal. So that's important. And this would have been way back, episode 2 or 3, I think it was. I talked about Unleash the Archers, Canadian power metal band from BC.
Yeah, I like them.
Extremely talented.
Mm-hmm.
They have a song called Abyss that came out off their new album that came out in August. There is a song called Abyss Wave, which is a synth wave rendition of the song off their album. And it basically just combines my two favorite musical worlds. And what else am I supposed to listen to? Should I listen to synthwave? Really cool. Should I listen to metal? No, I'm just going to keep listening to the same song over and over again. That's unreal.
Cool. Maybe it's annoying, but it's also really nice when you just find a song like that. I find it annoying because it's like there aren't other songs that are that. I want like hundreds of these, but there isn't any. There's only this one.
So yeah, I got trapped this week. Listen to that because it's just so good.
I'll definitely check that one out. If it's just the one song, I'll 100% check that out.
Yeah, it's like 5 minutes long or something like that. So it's not the end of the world.
Yeah. When you recommended Unleash the Archers, I did listen to them a little bit. There is one song by them that is like power metal crossed with a sea shanty, and I love sea shanties, and I love like Irish, Scottish folk music and folk music in general, but that kind of like, I don't know how to describe it, but that sort of,
I think that's a cover. It's a cover song of like a folk song.
Really? That would make sense.
I have to go double check the title. I know which song you're talking about.
It's the Northwest Passage, I believe.
Northwest Passage, yes. Which is I think originally a song by some Canadian folk artist who might also be from BC. Cool. I'm not sure. But yeah, they do a cover of it. And yeah, it's a belter. And that's a good tune.
It's great. Yeah, I really like that one. That's cool. That's cool that they have the breadth to be able to span such genres.
Like I said, it's just a cool song. It's sick. So I'll have to try to break the habit.
Maybe I'll send you a couple of links. That
would help.
Yeah. The heavier stuff though, of course.
Always heavy.
Yeah. Well, I think that wraps up team training.
That's right.
Yeah. If anybody's got other topics that they want us to talk about or want to let us know, if a
Anything.
3-point dunk is logistically possible, yeah, then hit us up on Instagram, Speed Strength Show for the show, Speed Strength Performance for Thomas, and Braden Southern for myself, or YouTube comments or whatever. We'll find it. Ideally, well, yeah, we'll find it eventually anyway. Maybe not
We will
immediately.
find it and respond
Yes, we'll
in a
respond for sure.
reasonable amount of time. I don't have a definition
I'm
for a
just not-
reasonable amount of time, but
As soon as possible. How about that?
yeah,
How about that? Yeah, we're not scrolling for YouTube comments, so I don't know if we'll get notified if those happen.
yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah. But yeah, let us know. Hit us up. And yeah, we'll see you next time. That was the Speed Strength Show. Thanks for coming along, world.
We will see you next week.
Peace.